Okay, so today we're tackling a really complex and, let's be honest, a very sensitive topic, the strategic calculus of war. We're going to be looking at geopolitical analyses that explore the potential strategic benefits for Israel in a conflict with Iran. Now, I want to be crystal clear. This is purely an examination of strategy based on the source material we've reviewed.
But before we go a single step further, we have to start right here. This is absolutely critical. What we're about to discuss are the cold, hard calculations of geopolitics and military strategy. This is in no way, shape, or form a moral endorsement of conflict. The human cost of war is devastating, and it has to be the first thing we think about, always.
All right, with that clear, let's dive in. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the strategic goal of weakening a regional rival. Then, we'll see how conflict can actually strengthen alliances and defenses. After that, we'll turn to the domestic angle, consolidating power at home. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the geopolitical bottom line.
So first up, weakening a regional rival. This part of the analysis really zeroes in on two of Israel's biggest security concerns when it comes to Iran: its nuclear program and that web of regional proxy groups it supports.
For years, a core Israeli security objective has been all about preventing Iran from reaching what's known as breakout capacity. So what is that? Well, think of it as the tipping point, the moment a country has all the key ingredients it needs to build a nuclear weapon on very short notice. And we know that before the recent escalations, Iran's stockpiles of enriched uranium were already a huge international concern.
So from a purely military perspective, here's the logic. Direct military action is seen as a way to physically hit the brakes on that progress. The goals are pretty straightforward: damage key facilities like enrichment plants, push back the timeline for any potential weapon, shrink those existing stockpiles of uranium, and, maybe most importantly, send a crystal clear message that a nuclear-armed Iran is a red line that won't be crossed.
But the strategic calculation doesn't just stop with the nuclear program. There's another huge piece to this puzzle, and that's Iran's influence across the entire Middle East. An influence it projects through a network of allied groups, often called proxies. Let's take a look at what that network actually looks like.
And this really gives you a snapshot of that network. We're talking about powerful groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthi forces down in Yemen, and a whole range of militias operating in Iraq and Syria. All of these groups get funding, weapons, and guidance from Tehran, which basically extends Iran's reach right up to Israel's borders.
So what's the strategic thinking here? Well, the logic goes something like this. A direct conflict would force Iran to pour its resources, we're talking money, weapons, attention, into defending itself. In theory, that means less support to go around for its regional proxies. And if those proxies are weaker, the thinking goes, the threats on Israel's borders could eventually decrease.
Now for the second major theme in this analysis, and it's a bit counterintuitive. It's the idea that a conflict can actually end up strengthening a nation's own position by tightening its alliances and battle-testing its own defenses.
A major conflict often has a way of solidifying partnerships. In this case, analysts point to a much more integrated military effort between the United States and Israel. What does that mean in practice? It means deeper joint planning, more seamless intelligence sharing, getting access to advanced American weapons, and having that crucial political support on the world stage.
And here's a pretty stark reality of modern war. It is the ultimate stress test. No computer simulation, no training exercise can ever fully replicate the chaos and complexity of a real battle. It's a brutal but unparalleled opportunity for military research and development. And this has been especially true for Israel's multi-layered missile defense systems. You've got the Iron Dome, David's Sling, the Arrow system, not to mention all the intelligence and cyber platforms working behind the scenes. They've all been tested under live fire conditions. And that kind of test doesn't just show you what works, it shines a massive spotlight on the vulnerabilities that you need to fix for the next time.
Conflict can also totally redraw the diplomatic map. For a long time now, many Gulf states have seen Iran as their biggest regional threat. And you know that old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Well, that really comes into play here. A shared threat from Iran could speed up the very trend we saw with things like the Abraham Accords, pushing these countries into even closer security and economic ties with Israel.
Okay, let's shift our focus inward now, because these strategic calculations don't just happen on the battlefield. They also include the domestic front, the political, the economic, and even the psychological impacts on a nation at war.
It's a classic phenomenon in political science. You might have heard of it. It's called the rally round the flag effect. When a country is facing a clear and present danger from the outside, a divided public can often unify, at least temporarily, which boosts national solidarity and support for the government.
And you can see that dynamic really clearly right here. When the public's perception of a threat is high, you often see support for the government go up, and that feeling of national cohesion gets stronger. Now, that political unity might not last forever, but while it does, it can be an incredibly powerful asset for a government fighting a war.
And then you've got the economic and reputational angles. When you successfully showcase advanced military technology on the world stage, it can seriously increase the demand for that tech from other countries. It also cements your nation's reputation as a major security power, and that kind of reputation can translate directly into more diplomatic clout.
And that brings us to the bottom line. This is where we have to bring the two sides of this story back together: the abstract world of geopolitical strategy and the very, very real world of human consequences.
This slide puts it all in stark contrast. It's like two different accounting books for the same war. On one side of the ledger, you've got the strategic gains we've been talking about: reinforced deterrence, a weaker enemy, stronger alliances. But on the other side, you have the undeniable human costs: civilian casualties, people forced from their homes, psychological trauma, and the very real risk of long-term instability that can echo for generations.
So we end with this question, and really, it's the fundamental challenge at the very heart of international relations. Understanding the strategic calculus is one thing, but it leaves us, and world leaders, grappling with a much harder problem. How do you draw the line between a geopolitical goal and the profound human price that has to be paid to achieve it?